The sun broke over the leafy horizon east of Eichenwald. Warm rays of sunlight cut through the cool, clear air of the village. A thin line of smoke rose from the baker's outdoor oven, and the smell of warm bread drifted down the cobbled lane. Hans wiped sweat from his brow as he slid a wooden peel into the flames. Golden loaves crackled softly inside. His father, sturdy and kind-eyed, watched from nearby. "Good," his father said. "You've got the heat just right." Hans smiled. "I told you I could manage the oven myself." "You can," his father replied. "But remember, bread burns faster when you start bragging." They worked in easy rhythm, drawing out the loaves and laying them on the wooden table to cool. The crusts were golden, still whispering steam. When the last loaf was ready, his father stacked them carefully in a burlap sack, tying the top with twine. "These are for market," he said. "I'll take them later today, but first I must visit old Frau Kappel. She's fallen ill again." He placed a hand on Hans's shoulder. "Once these last loaves cool, pack them as well and bring all the bread inside." "Yes, Papa," Hans said dutifully. Hans picked up one of the fresh, crusty loaves, admiring it in his hands. "Perfect," he said proudly. "Perfectly boring," said Elizabeth, who had appeared behind him without a sound. "Elizabeth," Hans startled, "you nearly made me drop it." She grinned mischievously, picked up a handful of raw flour and flicked it at him. It puffed across his shirt in a little white cloud. "Elizabeth, you look better now," she said, giggling. "Out," Hans said, tugging at her arm and leading her to the other side of the house. "Go and feed the chickens or something." "Fine," she laughed. "You're no fun anyway." Hans sighed, brushing at his sleeves, muttering about annoying sisters. He stared at the chicken coop, thinking about their simple, predictable lives. The sack of bread was completely out of his mind. A few minutes of daydreaming passed before something pulled his attention back to the present. "Oh right, the bread," Hans said aloud to himself. He turned. The table was empty. Panic flared. He looked under the table, around the oven, behind the stack of firewood. Nothing. Where could it be? Then he heard a faint scraping sound, burlap dragging on stone. "Elizabeth," he called, "over here." Her voice came from the road. "I think I found your thief." Hans ran to the gate. Down the lane, a stray dog, shaggy, brown, and quite pleased with itself, was dragging the bulging sack of bread in its teeth. "No, drop it, bad dog," Hans shouted, sprinting after it. The dog, deciding this was a fine game, bolted toward the trees. "Hans!" Elizabeth cried, laughing and chasing behind. "It's going to the stream." "I know," Hans puffed, feet pounding the dirt path. They raced down the hill, across the meadow, and toward the silverback stream, which shimmered in the sunlight. The dog reached the bank, tail wagging, the sack dragging dangerously close to the water. "Don't you dare," Hans shouted, imagining the soaked, ruined loaves if the dog went farther. He lunged for the bag and got one hand on it. Luckily, the twine was holding for the moment. The dog growled, jockeying for position along the stream and shaking its head to recapture full control of the prize. A few steps away, Elizabeth picked up a rock, oval and worn smooth from the stream. She hurled it at the dog and managed to hit her mark. It was a glancing blow to its shoulder, just enough to startle the dog, and it momentarily released its grip. Hans felt the sudden release of tension in his hand and found his center of gravity slipping away. He twisted backward, right toward the rushing water of the stream. In a last, desperate attempt, he flung his hand forward and released the burlap, sending the bread flying. Splash! He hit the cold water, and a shock ran through his body from head to toe. For a moment, all he saw was blue sky and bubbles. The water burned his eyes. Then he felt a tug on his shoulders. Elizabeth had caught his sleeve and helped pull him up toward the bank. They both turned their heads at the same time to look at the grassy bank. The dog was nowhere in sight. "At least the bread is safe," Hans sputtered, dripping. Across the stream, from the shade of the forest, a figure watched, cloaked and still, nearly blending with the trees. Its face was hidden, but its eyes followed the siblings carefully as Hans wrung out his sleeves and gathered the rescued bread. Hans didn't notice. He was too busy trudging up the path, sack over his shoulder, shoes squelching with every step. "Maybe let's not tell Papa about any of this," Hans said to Elizabeth. "But then I won't be able to tell him how I rescued my older brother, and what great rock-throwing aim I have," Elizabeth retorted. "It's your fault anyway, for distracting me," Hans said half-heartedly. Elizabeth just rolled her eyes. When they reached the house again, the sun was a bit higher and wispy clouds were starting to form in the clear blue sky. They entered the house and Hans sank into a chair, sighing. "Quite the adventurous day," he said aloud. Elizabeth leaned on the doorframe, smiling, "And it's only morning." With their cargo now secured, the two left the house to find their friends in the village and share the story of their morning adventure. Little did Hans know, the morning's events would seem like nothing at all compared to what awaited him in the days ahead. Their father came home after a good visit with old Frau Kappel. He was glad to see her fever had broken and that her younger sister was staying with her, making sure she was getting rest and enough to eat and drink. As he strolled through the door, he turned his mind back to the work of the day. The sack of bread was right where he had expected Hans to put it, on the table near the hearth. He picked it up and inspected it. Something caught his eye. "That's funny," he thought to himself. The bag had a stain of dirt he hadn't noticed before, and some blades of grass were stuck to it as well, woven into the fibers of the sack. He undid the twine and glanced inside. All the bread looked fine. He shrugged to himself as he gave the twine a little tug, closing the bag once again. "Okay, let's get these off to market," he said. Thanks for watching. Join us again next time for more Tales from Under the Linden Tree.